When you're paying attention to your own personal development, you'll eventually get to a point where you run across something from your past that you need to let go of. But the real question for me when I got to that point was, well, what does it mean to let go? How do you do this? What's that all about? Hi, I'm Beth Strathman. Welcome back to my channel, dedicated to your personal growth and development. Today I'm talking about what the heck it really means to let go of something from your past. So when I look at my own things that I needed to deal with, let go of, whether it was feeling like maybe somebody from my past treated me wrongly, or even to let go of something that I myself did that was still troubling me, I started to really think about, what it was about that event or that person that was kind of staying stuck for me, that I revisited over and over again. I mean, really, after all, that's what it means when you haven't let go of something, is that it's something that's kind of rolling around in your head that you just can't shake. You just can't let go of it. And what I came to conclude was, first of all, when you're letting go of something, it's not about forgetting it or trying to forget that whatever it was that happened. You're always going to have that memory. I mean, it may fade a little bit over time or a lot over time, but you'll always remember things that have happened in your past that affected you deeply. So it really wasn't about just focusing on the events and trying to let go of whatever happened in and of itself. What I came to discover was it was really about, for me, the emotions that were tied to it. And also connected to that, the story that I told about myself in that situation or with that person from the past that was compelling for me. It fed a certain part of my identity that I wanted to keep, or at least keep alive in some way, in some respect. So, for example, if you have a story about someone from your past and how they treated you and you didn't feel treated very respectfully or whatever, the key thing to really get clear about is your memory and your experience of that situation was really only one-sided. It's only from your vantage point, only from your perspective. So with that, the story that I was keeping alive for myself was really one-sided. And of course, because I got to retell the story in my head over and over again, the story and the way I positioned myself in the story was in a more positive light, perhaps, than I really had in the actual events that occurred. So there was a lot more information, a lot more context that either I didn't perceive at the time or I didn't store in my memory and keep the whole big picture alive regarding what actually happened. And if I could let go of, or maybe round out the fuller story, even though I couldn't go back in time and see what actually happened. But if I could think about what the fuller story might have been, then maybe I wouldn't take whatever happened so personally. So it's really interesting what happens in the brain when we experience something that's got pretty high emotions connected to it, whether they're happy or sad or frustrating or there's anger involved, whatever. But most of the things that we need to let go of usually involve some kind of a negative emotion. And what we know from a brain science standpoint is that the more intense the emotion is, and even the more negative the emotion is, the more readily it's stored in your brain. That is, the neurons fire and create neural networks around that story. And the more you replay it in your head, you're just reinforcing those neurons firing together. So what happens when you rehearse the story in your head or relive it over and over again, you're just not only you're reliving the emotions, and that also is helping to reinforce those neural networks. And eventually you start to create more receptors on your cells that are there for the neurotransmitters that are released that go along with the particular emotion. So for example, if you experienced anger every time you think of that story, then your body secretes the neural networks or produces the neurotransmitters required to make you feel angry. And then the cells in your body that have receptors for that particular emotion or those neurotransmitters create actually more receptor sites. So the more you get worked up over time, the more receptors you have, and the more you seek that same kind of feeling. It's like an addiction. You get addicted to your emotions in a way. So, for example, if I think about a situation that happened in my past that made me really angry, what I think about when I replay the situation in my head is the emotion that comes up for me. And sometimes it's like this righteous indignation, like, how dare they? Of course, I was the innocent party, right? And I got to tell you that righteous indignation is a really great feeling sometimes. So having that feeling, once you remember the story, makes you want to have that feeling again, right? So you kind of keep the story alive in your brain and in your body because of the relationship between the neurotransmitters and the emotion and the story that you're telling about yourself. So it's that kind of reward, that kind of emotional payoff, that jazz that you get from those neurotransmitters that help you or conspire with you to keep that story alive, even though it's probably not the healthiest story for you to remember. So it's not the event in and of itself. It's the story and the emotion that you have attached to it that keeps it alive for you and keeps you from really letting go of it. So, okay, great. Now we know it's the story and the emotion. So, okay, how do we let go? How do we not replay that story or that event or that person and how they treated us over and over in our minds? Well, first of all, I think one good thing is to really get curious and get curious and let go of any judgment you have about the story, because like I said before, you really only remember your perspective. You only experienced your perspective. So the story that you're telling yourself doesn't include the entire context. And if you get curious and non-judgmental, then you open yourself up to wonder, well, I really wonder what was going on with the other person or the other people involved in this story. Well, I wonder what it was like for them. I wonder what was really going on that led them to have the kind of interaction that they had with me, or to do the things that they did that made things difficult for me. So put yourself in their shoes and see if you can get the perspective that you can add to the story that you've been telling yourself. I mean, that's part of forgiveness, right? Which is not holding things against somebody. Not that you forget what they did, but you're just not going to get caught up in it anymore. You're going to let it go as though it hadn't been committed, even though the act hadn't been committed, even though you know that it had. So related to this is to get a perspective on the whole interaction, if you can. So that's sort of like elevating your perspective to a position above what was going on, so you can take in all of the people, all of the things that maybe people were thinking or doing, where they were coming from, where they were trying to go, that just gives you that more complete picture of what was all entailed in the events that have caused you to ruminate over them over the years. And also related to this perspective thing is acknowledge anything that could have limited your perspective. For example, one big thing that limits our perspective from a lot of stories in our lives is the fact that they happened in our childhood. So we had the perspective of a child, and that's kind of limiting because we didn't, our brains aren't fully developed when we're younger that way. So we don't have the capacity to reason and in the moment. And of course, we're limited because we don't know what's going on in other people's heads. We only see what they did or heard what they said. So just acknowledge that because we didn't have the fullest perspective at the time, we didn't really understand the entire story that happened to us. So our reaction to it may not be, I want to say, justified. And also related to all the neurotransmitter stuff that I talked about before, in addition to being curious and getting the perspective and everything and not being judgmental about what happened, acknowledge that when you think about the story, or even retell it, if you're still retelling it to other people, notice the emotions that come up and that feeling of satisfaction that you might get from those emotions, like I talked about from the righteous indignation, about how dare they have treated me that way or whatever. You might get a payoff from feeling sad. You might get a payoff from anger. You might get an emotional payoff from feeling self-pity or arrogance or whatever it is that, you just get riled up about, right? And it energizes your body when you feel that emotion go through, whatever it is. So notice that, because once you start to notice it and put a name to it, then you're more likely to go, oh, yeah, there it is. That's what's making me hold on to this story that I really have decided I want to let go of. So those are some of my thoughts on letting go, and a couple of things to be aware of that help you let go a little more easily. Don't make any mistake about it. Letting go is often hard because whatever that story or that resentment, whatever it is we're carrying that we want to let go of, has become a real fixture in our lives. It's become a piece of our identity in a lot of cases. It reinforces the identity that we think we have of ourselves. So it's not easy, but it is doable if you're focused on the right things. So instead of focusing just on the events and trying to forget what happened, really look at the emotions involved and the story that you're telling about yourself. And that's really where you want to concentrate on letting go. Thanks for watching.